orientating the patient's airway. Now, I know that pure anatomy can be quite dry, so we've introduced a lot of clinical content to help to keep you interested. The anatomy activity will be divided into a number of topics. We're going to be covering the nose, the mouth and pharynx, the larynx, and the trachea and bronchial tree. And please look at the resources section where you'll find links to video demonstrations of all those topics. So I'd like to start by talking about the larynx, and the reason for that is the larynx is absolutely key in airway management, and also because it's a really interesting and complex structure involved in phonation, coughing and straining, and it prevents aspiration of food into the airway. So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail of the larynx. So first of all, we'll talk about the cartilages, which are these large white structures. Now there are 9 cartilages. We've got 3 unpaired cartilages, the thyroid, the cricoid cartilage, and the epiglottis. And then we've got 3 paired cartilages, the arytenoids, the corniculates, and the cuneiforms, which you can't see quite so well on here. So let's go into all of that in a bit more detail. So first of all, to orientate you, up here we've got the hyoid bone. So it's the only bony structure in the larynx. This big shield-shaped structure is the thyroid cartilage, and if I turn it round, you can see the laryngeal prominence, which is also known as the Adam's apple, more prominent in men. And inferior to the thyroid cartilage is the cricoid cartilage. Now, if I turn the model around, you can see that the cricoid cartilage is a complete ring of cartilage, unlike the tracheal cartilages, which are C-shaped and joined posteriorly by the trachealis muscle. And the cricoid cartilage is narrow anteriorly and wider posteriorly, and that's why it's referred to as being the shape of a signet ring. And below the cricoid cartilage, these are the tracheal rings. So I turn the model round, we've got the arytenoid cartilages, which are these triangular shaped cartilages. And at the apex of the arytenoids are the corniculate cartilages just on the tip, and also attached to the apex of the arytenoids are the cuneiform cartilages. And while we've got the model this way around, you can also see this flapping structure, and this is the epiglottis. It's also a cartilage, and it flaps down like the lid of a bin to help prevent aspiration of food down into the airway. So let's talk about the more interesting structures of the larynx. Here we can see the vocal cords. Now, the vocal cords in real life are a pearly white colour, and they're interesting because any tube, such as an endotracheal tube, will pass through the vocal cords, and you'll need to visualise them on laryngoscopy. Here is the epiglottis, and you can see it flapping down over the vocal cords, and it sometimes obstructs your view on laryngoscopy. So another structure, which is of clinical interest, is this ligament here that runs between the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage, and it's called the cricothyroid ligament. And that's interesting because that is the site of emergency front of neck access, or cricothyroidotomy. So in a case, for example, of airway obstruction, you can access the airway through this structure. Below it you have some tracheal rings, and in the case where a surgeon wants to insert a tracheostomy, they'll do that between the 2nd and 3rd tracheal rings. So now I'm going to talk about the muscles of the larynx. Now, they're essentially divided into the extrinsic and the intrinsic muscles. Now, on this model we can't see any of the extrinsic muscles, but they're essentially on the outside, and all you need to know is that they elevate and depress the whole larynx. Now, of more interest are these intrinsic muscles which move the vocal cords. So first of all, we're going to talk about the muscles that tense and relax the vocal cords. So this muscle here anteriorly runs from the cricoid cartilage to the thyroid cartilage, and it's called the cricothyroid muscle. And the role of the cricothyroid muscle is to tense the vocal cords. So I turn the model sideways on. You can see that as that muscle tenses, the whole of the thyroid cartilage hinges forward. So this hinges forward. And as it hinges forward, the vocal cords tense. Then the muscle that relaxes the vocal cords is around here. It's called the thyroarytenoid muscle because it runs from the thyroid to the arytenoid. And as that muscle tenses, the vocal cords relax. So the next we're going to talk about the muscles that abduct and adduct the vocal cords, and they are called the cricoarytenoids. So firstly, on the posterior side of the model, we have the posterior cricoarytenoid. Now, as the posterior cricoarytenoid tenses, the vocal cords abduct. That means that they open, abduct or open. And another muscle is called the lateral cricoarytenoid, which runs from the cricoid to the arytenoid down the side of the vocal cords. And the function of that muscle is to adduct the vocal cords or close the vocal cords. So as well as that, we have a couple of muscles that run between the arytenoids. We've got a pair of oblique arytenoids and an unpaired transverse arytenoid. And the last two muscles are those that invest in the epiglottis, and they act like a purse string to close the laryngeal aperture to prevent aspiration of food. And they are called the aryepiglottic and the thyroepiglottic muscles. So that's the larynx.